Randi Hyatt is with us today, and Randi is no stranger to a number of us in this room and in the organization. She has been practicing management side employment law for nearly a quarter of a century now and has had the great pleasure of working with us for just about a decade. And we can equally say that it is our pleasure as well to have Randi working with us on our side as outside employment counsel. Randi represents employers in all areas of employment law. She has a particular interest, though, in involvement with healthcare industry employers. She enjoys working with employment issues that are unique to us in the hospital world. High stress, always on, 24/7. The demands of this workforce, you know it. I need to tell you about that. As part of her practice, Randi most enjoys working collaboratively with her clients to provide advice and counsel in the early stages of an employment issue so that litigation can be avoided. She served as an adjunct faculty member at the University of Baltimore School of Law, where she taught employment law and legal writing for a number of years. She is also very highly sought after to speak at conventions and conferences, where she does a great job of educating audiences on various employment law topics and trends. This morning's keynote from Randi is sensitivity and civility in the workplace, and she's here to tell us more about some important behaviors and practices that we all should be taking a real hard look at and paying a closer attention to, including respect, diversity, cultural competency, inclusion, harassment, and communication approaches. So, ladies and gentlemen, my friends in the audience, please welcome to our August Leadership Day away, Ms. Randi Hyatt.
Thank you so much.
So good to see you again. How are you doing?
Great. I'll give you $20 for that introduction later. Thank you. Good morning, everybody. So as Roger said, I have actually been an employment lawyer for almost 25 years, which is just crazy to me. And it is the only kind of law I have ever practiced. I had no idea what employment law was when I was in law school. But once I landed the job at the firm that I am still with, which is also another unique thing, most lawyers do not do the same kind of law their entire lawyer life, and most lawyers do not stay at the same firm their entire lawyer life. I did have a brief sabbatical. Can everyone hear me? Are we good? Okay, good. Okay. If you can't hear me, just yell, throw something at me. I did have a brief sabbatical between my start at my current firm. I went to another firm in the same building. It made for some awkward elevator rides for about 8 years, and then for a variety of reasons went back to my first firm and have been back here and love it. And employment law is the only law I do, so I know a lot about it. I've seen and heard a lot of pretty intense, crazy things, and so when Mitzi and her team and I, and that's often who I am working with, of course, when employment issues come up, when we were talking about today and how we can best make the information that I have and my ability to hopefully educate and inspire you all, what is it that we can talk about? Now, harassment in the workplace is always something that's important, and I am definitely going to be touching on that. And in the past, when I've had the pleasure of being able to speak to a large group, and I think it was in 2012 that I last addressed sort of this version of your group, I did spend some time talking about that. But given the way things have been evolving in the legal world and in the real world, which sometimes overlap nicely and sometimes don't, we really thought it would be very important to focus in on sensitivity, diversity, and respect in today's workplace, which really piggybacks very nicely. I told Steve after he finished his remarks this morning, I said, you couldn't have set me up any better, talking about the vision and the core values, and I am really going to talk about those as well, but we're going to dig deep, and I am going to challenge you all to really think about what a respectful workplace means, and not just the obvious answer, and how each of you in the room can do certain things to make the workplace more respectful, both from how you conduct yourselves and what you expect of others. As Roger mentioned when he read that lovely bio that I wrote for him, I spent many years as an adjunct faculty member, and I bring that up only to forewarn you that the teacher in me will absolutely call on people in the audience. And I usually go to the people in the back because I already know you're back there because you don't want to be called on. But I will say this, you know, I can stand up here, for those of you that have worked with me or have seen me, for better or worse, I could stand up here and talk all day. That isn't going to be that exciting, even though I'd like to think I'm that exciting. This is going to be a lot more meaningful for everybody if we collaborate, if we have a conversation. Each of you brings your experiences as an individual, as a leader for this organization, and I hope you all will feel comfortable sharing and contributing so that we can really have a great conversation this morning. I've got a couple of ground rules that I like to just throw out to everybody so that when we're having our conversation this morning, and also as well later this afternoon, because you don't just get me in the morning, you get me in the afternoon too. I just want to make sure that we are all on the same page. Respect, and respect is going to be a word that I'm going to be saying over and over again, but let's respect each other. Have an open mind. I might be saying some things that you're going to think are a bit out there. Maybe you haven't heard them, or maybe you've heard them but not presented and packaged in the way that I am going to for you. So please have an open mind. I'm not saying you have to agree with me, but I would appreciate very much that you at least listen, take it in, as well as for anything that any of your colleagues might share. And on that point, what happens in the classroom stays in the classroom. Now, obviously, I'm hoping you're educated and inspired and take that back to your jobs and your places within the organization. But let us remember that we're trying to sort of promote a safe space here for conversation and talking. And so let's do that by knowing that what somebody might say in here, if it's perceived perhaps negatively or is taken a bit differently, that it stays here and it's understood that it's done for the purposes of promoting discussion. I know we all are busy, important people. If you do have phones and can keep them on silent, that would be great. And then please contribute to the conversation. It will definitely make, I think, it more valuable for everybody. And above all else, let's have some fun. Ways that you all can participate, or at least try to participate. There's the prisoner approach. Oh no, another meeting from which there's no escape. At least the doors are open, but you know what I mean. Here we are again, having to listen to some lawyer get up on the stage and talk, talk, talk. Let's hope that that's not the approach you take. Then there's the tourist approach. Hey, I'm here, this is fun. What can y'all do for me? Put on a show, entertain me. Okay, I'll try to do that, but I'd also suggest that that's probably not the best approach either. Lastly, partner, collaborate. What can I do to help make this event successful? So let's all go for the partner approach if we can. Okay, before I advance to the next slide, it's time for each of you to pick up your pen, or a pen, or your neighbor's pen, some kind of something to write with, and to find a blank piece of paper. You all have a decent amount of paper on your tables. You also have a printout of this PowerPoint. I recognize that the slides are a bit small, but please feel free to make notes as I talk if you find notes to be relevant. But somewhere on a piece of paper, this is going to be just for you. I want you to take 3 minutes, and I'm going to look at my watch and keep us on a timer. You are going to write down 10 words that describe you. Any characteristics, any attributes. There is no wrong answer. There's no, don't look at your neighbor because your neighbor's not you. 10 words that describe you. 3, 2, 1, go. Okay, pens down. And for those of you who didn't finish, if you still want to finish, that's okay. I'll permit you. So I have done an exercise like this before when I've presented, usually in a smaller group. And what will happen when I do it in a smaller group, I've got the ability to collect the sheets that you've written on and kind of quickly synthesize some of the, and I don't ask anyone to put their name on it. I like to keep it anonymous for a lot of reasons, but hopefully just so people feel comfortable accurately and honestly writing those characteristics down. And then I'll sit here with like a big whiteboard and a dry erase marker and, and write up the different characteristics and group them and silo them. Given the size of this wonderful group today and time constraints and the material that I want to cover, I decided to modify the exercise a bit. But I think it's really important and will hopefully help sort of establish a great foundation for a lot of what we're going to be talking about, not only in my presentation this morning, but the other presentations and information you're going to receive throughout the day. All right, so, and I'll do this last caveat. You don't have to raise your hand to answer any of my questions if you don't feel comfortable doing so. This is not an exercise intended to single anybody out or to make anybody feel awkward or embarrassing. It's just to kind of get people thinking about who we are, how we identify ourselves, which very much, whether we realize it or not, or want to admit it or not, goes directly into how we evaluate and assess and identify others, which goes into a big part of respect and cultural competency, as you will see. So, how many of you, and you can just show by raise of the hand, identified in one of your words that you wrote down, identified yourself by your gender, either male or female? Raise your hand. Nobody? What? Wow, that is a record. Okay, actually, that's pretty impressive to me. Okay. How many of you identified yourself by whatever race or races you identify yourself by? Nobody? You guys are not making this very easy on me. Okay. I might have to collect some of these sheets to see if you're being honest. Okay. How many of you identified yourself by your religion? Okay, a couple hands. All right, so I'm starting to get into the right lake, apparently. All right, how about your political affiliation? No? Okay. How about your marital status? Couple people. Okay. How about your familial status? Having children, not having children, having, grandchildren perhaps, that kind of thing. Okay, getting a few more people. Okay, how about languages that you may speak? Being multilingual. How about your country of origin? What did you guys write? Adjectives. Okay, all right. I'm cool with adjectives. All right. Does anybody care to raise their hand and share an adjective? Yes. Engaged. Okay. Can I ask you a follow-up question other than the question that I just asked you? Okay. What do you mean by engaged? One more time? Engaged with your team and your family? Great. Okay, being engaged is good. Great. Any others who care to volunteer a word that they wrote? Yes? Honest. That's a fantastic quality to have. So by being honest, let me ask you this if I may. Do you assume that the people with whom you interact are also honest? Yes. So your default assumption is the person that I'm dealing with is going to be honest until perhaps they maybe show me otherwise. Okay, great. Any others who are willing to raise a hand? Yes? Sense of humor. Okay, having a sense of humor or not having a sense of humor, which is it? Okay, having a sense of humor. Okay. Does everybody agree that he has a sense of humor? Okay, great. Any others? Yes? Nurturing. Well, that is a great quality to have, especially in a healthcare organization. Nurturing, great. Any others? I'll take one or two more. Yes? Thoughtful. So what do you mean by thoughtful? So caring about other people, what their needs are, what their goals are, and trying to encourage. Fantastic. Anybody else? Last one. Way in the back. Hardworking. Hardworking, good work ethic. Excellent. So I loved all these attributes. So these are the ways you all will describe yourselves and how you perceive yourself. For the words that you wrote down, is it your belief, and you can just sort of answer with a hand, that you think other people would also describe you this way, or you hope they would? Right? This is how you see yourself, and this is how I hope other people see me? All right, this is a slightly unfair question, but I'll ask it anyway because I'm up here, so why not? Did any of you write down any characteristics or attributes that you might label as a negative? Okay. All right, good. All right, Steve. Hi, Cindy, I see you. Do you feel comfortable sharing one of those words that you might qualify as negative? OCD. Okay. Some may say it's a negative, some may say otherwise. So by that you mean very focused on detail and making sure things are precise and, okay, all right. Anybody else care to feel comfortable sharing something that they might qualify as negative or less than flattering? Yes. Forgetful. Okay. What did you say? No, just kidding. Okay. This was really great. So let me put this a little bit in context. And I realize that some of you, with the number that's in this room, may have written words down that hit some of these topics. So we have sort of our immutable traits, and I have a slide on that in a minute, how we're born, arguably things that are protected by different employment statutes out there. And then there's things that define us, but they're, whether they're really choices, but they're things that are more within our control, like our education level. How we were educated. Did we go to public school? Did we go to private school? Were we homeschooled? What kind of home were we raised in? Did we live in the same house our entire life, or did we move around a lot? Do we have a military background? Do we have hobbies? What kind of music do we like? Are you an extrovert, an introvert? I mean, there's so many different ways that we are, that make us who we are and that define us, whether we think about it or not, but it impacts every interaction we have, and in the workplace, it really can come into play in a lot of ways that you may not realize, and we're going to talk about those. All right, I know it says first question, but it's really not my first question, so next question. What are the characteristics of a respectful workplace? And you've already heard about respect this morning when Steve was talking about the vision and the core values. And I'm going to assume that every single person in this room believes and agrees that it is important that PRMC is a respectful workplace. Can I get a hand up in support of that? Okay, great. How many of you think that PRMC is actually a respectful workplace? Okay. How many of you believe that PRMC can do better at being a respectful workplace? Right? We can always do better, right? Okay. How many of you want to do better at ensuring that PRMC is a respectful workplace? Okay. All right, I just took a picture, so you better have raised your hand. No, just kidding. Okay. How do you do that? Right? It sounds good, right? Respect, respectful workplace. I want it. We all want it. I mean, for reasons we could all quickly list, nobody wants to work in a disrespectful workplace. But what does that really mean? How do we make the workplace more respectful? Anybody have a thought? Yes. Emphasizing the value of each person within the team. Fantastic. I couldn't agree more. Absolutely, and that's a lot of what you're going to hear me talk about as we continue this conversation about respect. What is it that we can do as individuals, as leaders within PRMC to ensure and improve the respectful workplace that we all believe we have, but also believe upon we can improve? So there are any number of definitions of a respectful workplace. I am not sure that this is the best definition, but I think it's a definition that works well with what PRMC does from my experience and what I believe PRMC will continue to want to do. A respectful workplace is one where all employees are treated fairly. Difference is acknowledged and valued. Every single person in this room is different, right? We are all different. I don't care if we grew up next to each other, if we had the same teachers, if we went to the same religious house, if we did the same activities after school, if we shop at the same grocery store, if we eat the same meals, and on I can go. Each of us is different. Some differences are deeper and more philosophical or cultural, but they're all there. But those differences are not only acknowledged, they're valued. It's one thing to say, okay, you and I have a difference of opinion. That's step one. How do you go about valuing that difference and making those differences that each of us bring part of the fabric that makes us work as a team? Communication. Again, words that you've already heard and you're going to hear about again, because respect and communication go hand in hand. Communication is open and civil. Civility in the workplace is not always easy to find, to foster. Anybody here have or know of a coworker that might be a little bit challenging to get along with when times are stressful? I know that never happens in healthcare. They might be challenging to get along with even when things are not high stress. Not at all talking to anybody in this room. Civility, however, is so crucial to ensuring civility and respect in the workplace, and we're going to talk more about that. Conflict is addressed early. And this is a theme that matters because of respect, because of civility, and also, from a more practical standpoint, putting employees on notice that there's an issue or a concern, whether it warrants discipline or not, so that there are no surprises. No, what are you talking about? I didn't realize that this bothered you. You've never said anything to me before. And now all of a sudden, you're blowing up. Let me give you sort of an analogy. When you have a disagreement, something happens in the workplace that doesn't go well, you're upset with a coworker for something they did or didn't do, something they said or didn't say, but it's not that big a deal, and you've got 20 other things to get to, and you forgot to email somebody, and you're waiting for a call from your students, your child's teacher, and any number of things that we all have juggling in our brain and on our phone at one moment. Whatever, I'll just let it go. So imagine you've got a backpack, right? And then you have a little pebble that gets put in that backpack because you've had that little bit of a conflict, but it's not that big of a deal. And then another day or two goes by, and maybe with the same coworker or with another coworker, there's another conflict, another disagreement. But again, you're busy, things are happening. That person isn't always easy to talk to, and I don't want to get into it, and I don't like conflict and confrontation, and I can't find my manager who's supposed to help me with this, but I'll just add that pebble to my backpack because I'm not unloading it. I'm not addressing the issue in a productive and open manner. So imagine as the days and weeks go by and all the interactions that you all in this room may have had or can anticipate having with your colleagues. That backpack's going to get pretty heavy, I bet, right? If you keep collecting these pebbles of different sizes, no boulders, because boulders are usually something that most of us will address. It's those smaller pieces that just add and add and add until you can't take it anymore and you throw that backpack off and anybody in your way is getting hit by it. A little bit extreme, but do you get what I'm saying here? So conflict is addressed early. And again, that's something we'll talk about more. And there's a culture of empowerment and cooperation. What do you think I mean by that? Or what do you think those words mean? Empowerment and cooperation. They sound good, but what does it really mean? Anybody have a thought? How do you empower people? I mean, you all are leaders, right? Leaders Day away. How do you as leaders empower people? Yes. One more time. Encourage teamwork. And how do you encourage teamwork? Challenging every individual to participate and bring their best self. How is each individual going to want to participate and bring their best self? Because they have a leader who believes in them, who listens to them, who does not dismiss them, and who validates them. Doesn't mean agrees with them, doesn't mean does everything that that individual says, but honestly makes them feel heard and valued. And that is the key to a lot of sort of making things work well. If people feel heard and valued and understood, even if the result isn't what they want, it's going to go a long way. And it's not just listening to the words that come out of their mouth, or it's not just hearing them explain why they're feeling a certain way. Where are they coming from? Who is this person? What is their background? What is their experience? Sometimes it may not seem like it makes sense to go that deep, but the more you truly know and understand who your employees and your subordinates are, and who your colleagues and your supervisors are, who your team is, the better you're going to be able to foster this culture of empowerment and cooperation. All right. Why is a respectful workplace important? I mean, I know that that's sort of a simple question, or it's an easy question, but the answer isn't necessarily simple. It's important because it's good to be in a respectful workplace, right? Because we don't want to work in a disrespectful workplace. But let's talk about some of the maybe less obvious but understandable reasons why it's important. Good mental health in the workplace. When people are in a good place, when they feel respected and they feel that their workplace is respectful, they are going to feel better. They are therefore going to produce better, work better, act better. Think about yourselves. When you're in a bad place, we all have bad days, bad moments. It's not as easy to do your best at work. Yeah, you might get the job done, but are you doing your best? Are you showing up, engaging your coworkers? Maybe you did an 8 out of 10 on a particular task as opposed to 9 or a 10 out of 10. Maybe you weren't as communicative with your colleagues. Maybe you weren't as cordial with some patients or family or visitors or vendors or whomever you might interact with. The work got done, but did it get done well? Did it get done with heart? So having good mental health helps that. People are held responsible for their actions because when you're in a respectful workplace, you're communicating openly, there is no question or uncertainty about what is expected and why it's expected. And then when you don't deliver, and we are human, people are not going to always perform to the expectations that are held for them. It isn't a surprise. They understand it. People don't like to admit that they've made a mistake. Sometimes they may be open about it, but they understand it. It also, and what is so important, respectful workplace fosters a workplace that embraces diversity. And we are a diverse workforce. And yes, I know we have a list on our EEO1 report that identifies how many total employees we have and what, who identifies as male, who identifies as female, who identifies as any variety of races, age, etc. So those are certain things that certainly one might argue show diversity, or maybe might argue don't show as much diversity as we'd like. But then diversity goes deeper. Our religion, our politics, our upbringing, how we were schooled, what we value as people, how we communicate. So diversity isn't just the color of your skin or the bathroom that you use on any given day. And I'm not going to go down that path of bathroom conversations. That is a whole different conversation. But understand that diversity means more than the things that we can just see on each other. It really goes into what's beneath it. Having a respectful workplace, of course, will improve working relationships, problem solving and conflict resolution, reduce workplace stress. If you feel that you are working in a respectful workplace, that you are respected, that you give respect, it just feels better. Think about a time when you were working when you did not feel respected. I'm confident every person in this room has felt a time when they have not felt respected. Because it happens, because we're an organization of people and it's going to happen. Or maybe you felt disrespected by a patient, or by a family, or by a vendor, or by a coworker. And think about how that made you feel. And think about how that impacted you until you perhaps felt better. You took that pebble out of your backpack. You approached it, you handled it. We want the people in our workplace at PRMC to feel valued, to feel respected, to know that their viewpoint matters, to know that what they show up and try to offer every day matters. And as leaders, it is incumbent upon us to understand what an employee brings may matter to him or her, even if it doesn't matter to you, but you've got to understand that. An employee may think, if I keep my workplace really neat and organized, I'm showing that I care. You as a leader may not care about that, because if we were to look at your workplace, it would look like, you know, one of those big fans had just blown for 20 minutes. And you may say, I don't care about your workplace being neat, I just want the work done. But that employee may have grown up in such a way that they're showing respect and appreciation for their job by keeping their workplace neat. Now, that doesn't mean they don't get to do the other parts of their job, but just understand that the way people tick and operate is not going to necessarily marry and match with what you value, so you need to dig deeper to figure that out. And then the lawyer in me, of course, because, you know, that's what I do. When you work in a respectful workplace, there is absolutely going to be less litigation, because people are not going to feel that they were cheated out of something, or that an employment or an adverse employment decision, because people don't sue over positive employment decisions, right? It's the demotions or the terminations or the significant disciplines or the pay decreases and any other number of things that might cause somebody to go, well, that's not fair. Why did that happen to me? And we'll talk more about that. And then the other reason that we want to make sure that this workplace is respectful is that very dirty 5-letter word that begins with a U, the union, right? That's also a whole other topic. But when employees feel respected and valued and heard, they are less likely to care about what a union has to say. And when a union comes into a workplace, it completely changes the dynamic. So we've already talked some of this, so I'll move a little bit more quickly through this slide. But how do we create, as leaders, this respectful workplace? We want to recognize and value the diversity, and not just the diversity of skin or the diversity of gender or some of those diversity of age. We want to really dig deep into what diversity means and how each of us shows up with our own story. So that means you need to connect with your people, the people that work with you, for you, around you. Who are you? What was your upbringing? What matters to you? What values do you have? And I understand that some of that may seem a bit awkward, and when do I have the time for this? This doesn't happen in one 20-minute conversation, but over time, as you as leaders show a sincere, and that word is important, sincere. And each of you probably has a very different communication style, so you've got to find what resonates true to you and is your method of communicating and listening and connecting. But how do you connect? And I am not at all suggesting that you need to know every single thing about every person that you work with on a daily basis. That would be impressive, but that would probably be difficult. But get to know the people other than just who they are, their badge number, and what their job description says. Learn about them. Just showing the interest in them and sharing about yourself. Whatever you're feel comfortable sharing, of course, but sharing about yourself shows respect. I'm not just wanting you to give to me, let me give to you. Fair treatment. And that is a huge thing. I've been able to do this for 25 years, and I suppose I'll be able to do it for another 25 if I'm so inclined, because so many employees will feel, and I'm not talking, I mean, PRMC, my favorite client, but not my only client. I have plenty of clients that have issues where employees leave the organization feeling that they weren't treated fairly. And if they think they're not treated fairly, or they don't understand why certain decisions were made or not made, they are going to be more likely to sue. It's just the way it goes. So if people feel that they're treated fairly, it's, again, going to work toward having harmony in the workplace. Sincere listening is huge, and I've made reference to that a few times. It's not just hearing the words and getting ready for your response. Have you all heard that? Listen, actively listen. Don't get ready to just respond, but actually listen to what I'm saying. And it's not just hearing the words and listening to the words that they say, but what's their perspective? Where are they coming from? Who are they? Why are they here? Why does this job matter to them? Why does this particular situation matter to them? Those are things that if you took the time, the extra minute or two to sort of think about, ask about, it would really go a long way to having employees believe that they were listened to and valued. Here's one that may seem a little bit, I don't want to say controversial, but a bit different. But the ability to give a sincere and earnest apology when it's warranted goes such a long way. And there's a lot of articles out there on the internet about how to apologize effectively and what's a good apology and what isn't a good apology. You know, I'm sorry that you felt that I upset you when I said those words isn't necessarily a sincere apology. I'm sorry I hurt your feelings, if that's in fact what it is you did. So you want to be able to, as leaders, own up to when you might make a mistake. And maybe your apology isn't because you hurt somebody's feelings. Maybe your apology is because you made a poor decision in the moment, or you delegated tasks in a way that didn't quite work out, or you set an unfair deadline, or any number of things that you as leaders probably have to deal with on any given day. When you realize you make a mistake, own up to it. Show your employees that you too, you know, it's just like for those of us that may have children or other younger people in our lives that we might be a role model for. When you make a mistake and you say, hey, I messed up and I'm wrong for it and I need to fix it and I need to apologize to this person for it, the same holds true here. And if you all sort of model that behavior, again, it's going to trickle down and show people that the workplace, that they're valued. And even if it's not that specific person, but they see it or they hear about it, because you know, things get around, right? People talk, whether we want them to or not, people talk, people know things. So let's let them hear those good things, right? People like to talk about the things that might not be perceived as so positive. Well, let's make sure we're giving them positive things to discuss. It's also important that feedback, planning, and distribution. Are you always going to the one or two people who, no matter what, can always get the job done? Is that fair to them? Is that fair to the people who are waiting to show you, hey, I can do this too? I might need some additional counseling or coaching. I might need some guidance, and you're going, I don't have time. I know this has to get done. Here you go, just handle it, because I know this person can handle it. And it's great to have your go-to people, and I'm not telling you can't have go-to people, but you also need to recognize that there may be a whole host of other individuals at your disposal that can become go-to people. And if they see that they're not one of your go-to people, or they're your go-to for only certain things that they identify as less important and significant, they are not going to feel respected. You might value what they do very highly, and it may be as important to you as the other person's tasks that you always go to. Does that employee know that? Have you communicated that? Have you shared that so they understand? I come to you to do this because you are great at it, and it matters to me, and here's how it affects the entire team, department, day, organization. However macro or micro you need to make it. That stuff really matters. And then, of course, having training like this, doing other things that may be implemented that can really show everybody at PRMC that we're not just giving lip service to this concept, because we can say stuff all day. Oh, we're a respectful workplace, I value you, I hear you, I want to hear what you have to say. But you have got to actually mean it, and you have got to have your actions be consistent with that. Okay. No tomatoes, please. Diversity. Okay. Talked about respect a bit, and we're going to keep coming back to that. But I want to talk a couple minutes about diversity. Who I am, why am I here? The exercise that we did at the beginning with sort of the write the 10 things down. Whatever you guys wrote, however you described yourselves, again, I don't think any one list would be the same as anybody else's list. And that's because each of us comes to work, shows up here with a sense of self that's informed by who we are, how we were raised, and the things that matter to us by our upbringing, our experiences, where we've lived, our education, how we were raised, etc. No two people are alike, which I think is a great thing. And sort of that cliche expression, variety is the spice of life. It is the spice of workplace life too. And it's a great thing, and we need to work on embracing that. Now, we talked about this a bit already, that diversity isn't just those, what some might call the immutable traits, either the traits you're born with or the traits that are protected by the different employment statutes out there. So obviously somebody can certainly perhaps change religions. Somebody may not always be disabled and then become disabled. Again, I will not get into, for purposes of today, a conversation about changing your gender identity or orientation. But these are all characteristics that are protected by the law, for the most part. Height isn't necessarily protected by the law, but your height is your height. You are what you are. Then there's the environmental traits that are things that are either learned or a bit more controllable, but all of these absolutely go to establishing who we are and who we're not. How long have I worked at PRMC? Have I worked elsewhere? What kind of languages do I speak? How do I like to communicate? Am I a face-to-face person? Am I a direct, blunt person? Or am I don't want to make waves, and I don't like confrontation, and I like to soften the blow kind of person? Generationally, I know, for example, in my office, I have certain partners who absolutely get so frustrated with too many emails. Why can't you just walk down the hallway and come into my office and talk to me? And I get that. You know what my response is? Because I'm really busy and I have 35 things I want to do, and it's just easier to send an email and then it gets out there. But I have a partner who has expressed that his communication style is that he would much rather, not that everything has to be done face-to-face, because he's not saying that, but it's good to have that face-to-face interaction. And he's right. And even if I don't think he's right, that's his preference. So do I say, too bad, I'm going to keep doing what I want to do? I think that would show a sign of disrespect. He thought enough to tell me what his preference was, and now it's incumbent upon me to honor that or dishonor that. And the way I honor it is by having more face-to-face conversations with him. The way I dishonor that is by not. So again, it's not even big things. It's not these significant things. There are so many smaller, more sort of mundane but important ways that we can really foster respect, even with the different kinds of diversity and dimensions we bring. Here are some other ways that we may differ: hobbies, how we dress, the color of our hair. You know, all these things matter and bring up and bring to the table different characteristics that you may at some point need to consider and appreciate. Somebody's military experience, somebody's economic status, somebody's health. We could probably sit here and make a list of 20 to 30 more. So just recognize that what you see is not always what you get. Right. Has anybody in this room ever been the subject of a negative reaction based only on your membership in a particular group? Yes. Okay. Do you feel comfortable sharing, or did you just want to give me a hand? Okay. You felt religious discrimination. Okay. Anybody else? Okay, I'll share an experience that I had. I went to the University of Baltimore School of Law for law school. I had never lived in Baltimore before. Are any of you familiar with Baltimore? All right, so for those of you that are familiar with Baltimore, this might make sense to you. It did not make sense to me. When I was starting law school and talking, meeting friends, talking to my classmates, a couple of people asked me, where did I go to school? Well, given that I just graduated college and was now in law school, I assumed the question meant, where did I go to college? So I said Virginia Tech, because I thought I was going to be an engineer, but that didn't quite work out. And this woman looked at me, she's like, no, where did you go to high school? And I thought, where did I go to high school? Why do you care where I went to high school? I said, well, I didn't grow up in Baltimore. I grew up in Montgomery County. She literally looked at me and said, oh, and walked away. I have come to learn that in Baltimore, it is all about where you went to high school, for better or worse. And that, again, it's really nothing to do with me. It's where I lived. I grew up in an area that wasn't of interest to her, and so she dismissed me, and there was a negative reaction based on where I didn't go to school. How about a positive reaction? Any of you have ever experienced a positive reaction or sort of acceptance or validation just because of a group that you're in or an association that you have with a particular organization? I know for, again, going back to the school thing in Baltimore, the second somebody learns where your children might go to school, oh, your kids are at so-and-so school. Oh, that's a great school. And then all of a sudden, you've got somebody who's very interested in talking to you. It's just the way it is. And I'm sure there's countless other examples. So, and I'm sure that the people who learn where my kids go to school might make then assumptions about me and our choices and my socioeconomic status. And they might think that I went to a similar kind of school, which I didn't. But again, these things just happen automatically. You don't even think about it. You might not even realize you're doing it until some point later. Why does this happen? When you look at somebody that you've never met before, you are sizing them up, right? How are they dressed? Are they wearing any kind of jewelry? Do they have a ring finger on? A ring on their ring finger. Do they have a ring finger? I hope they have all their fingers. Right? Are there visible tattoos and piercings? What kind of shoes are they wearing? Did they come in a car? Did they come on a bus? Do they have a bag, a purse, a paper bag, a fanny pack? I don't know, right? But do you not realize that when you look at somebody, you are making assumptions, and it's not necessarily that you're dismissing them or that you're saying like mean things in your head about the person. You're just making assumptions and kind of already deciding who they are. That whole don't judge a book by its cover, it's so true. But we do it because that's what we do, because we're people. And I am not going to stand up here and say stop that, because I don't know that we could really sincerely, honestly stop it. I think we need to recognize that we do it and then try to stop ourselves from landing at those assumptions without getting the chance to really learn about the individual. Views are like icebergs, right? 90% of the iceberg is invisible. So again, consider how harmful it can be to form opinions, judgments, and assumptions just based on a person's appearance and what you think you can deduce from that person's appearance. This slide's a little hokey, but given that we're a hospital, I figured, it might make sense. Right? If you saw that guy on the left walking in the street, would you necessarily want him doing your, I don't know, heart surgery? Probably not. Maybe you would. I don't know. But put a nice white coat on him and hang a stethoscope around his neck and cover up all his ink, and he looks perfectly acceptable. Okay. Any questions about that? Anything that I've said that doesn't make sense and you're going, what in the world is she talking about and how much longer is she going to be up there? Well, don't answer that part. Okay. I'm going to move on to cultural competency, which, again, we have been talking about, even if I haven't necessarily used those words specifically. We've been talking about respect, about differences, about diversity, and now I want to talk about cultural competency, which is also a little bit sort of toothy and long-winded, but I think as we unpack it, it will make sense. So, cultural competency speaks to the ability of individuals, processes, and systems to respond effectively to all people, regardless of who they are, all of their culture, class, religion, race, etc., while also recognizing and affirming their differences and similarities, because I know I've been talking a lot about differences, but we also do have similarities. For example, and again, I'm going to make an assumption, which is probably very counter to everything I've said so far this morning, but when you work for PRMC, for a healthcare institution, the assumption is we care about treating people and keeping people healthy or getting people healthy. So we do have some similarities. We may want to do it in a different way. We may not want to do it in that direct care patient way, but let's assume that our similarities are that we are here to help make this area and the population that we serve healthy. Keep them healthy, get them healthy. And we want to be able to have a culture that promotes differences and similarities in a manner that also encourages dignity and self-worth, recognizing the individual, valuing the individual. So I wrote up there in a word, tolerance. And I don't mean the grit your teeth and clench your fist kind of tolerance. I mean the full arm hug, embrace and welcome and value what each individual can bring to the table if they are nurtured and that culture of diversity and respect is fostered such that will lead to this cultural competency. I've already said it and I'll say it again. Get to know your coworkers. Talk less, listen more. I'm sure you all have heard this, but if not, let me be the first to tell you that the key to any sort of successful conversation with anybody is to get that person to talk about themselves. They'll think they had the best conversation ever. It's true. Think about the times when you're in a conversation with somebody and all they're doing is talking about themselves. Do you find it exciting? Are you at some point like, okay, let's either move on or hey, how about me? Yes, there needs to be balance. But talk less, listen more. As leaders, you want your employees, we're talking about feeling valued, feeling respected, trusted. They want to do more, show up more, be more of a go-to person. The more you know and understand them, the more you're likely going to want to use them and rely upon them. And if you have people who work with you that think, gosh, every time I go talk to Steve, he asks me sincerely how I'm doing, or knows about my child and remembers that he was trying out for soccer, and he asks how that went. Or he asks about something that's going on in the department, and then actually listens to what I have to say and asks some follow-up questions. That takes about 2 or 3 minutes, and oh, the world of difference it can make. Learn how to pronounce your coworkers' names. That sounds really sort of basic and silly, but there are going to be people with whom you work that may have difficult names to pronounce. Ask them, how do you like, may I ask you how you pronounce your name? I want to say it correctly. Or their children's names, or other things about them that will let them know that you mean it when you say you want to know sort of who they are and what they're about, and that you care, and you're not just trying to get through some task. And you want to go ahead and come to appreciate your similarities and differences. People approach everyday work differently no matter who they are. So the better you understand that, the better you're going to be able to support them to be successful with the tools they have in their toolbox versus the tools you have in your toolbox. You want to set expectations. That, as a leader, you want to do that no matter what. So I'm not telling you something you don't already know or probably haven't already heard. But you also then, to communicate those expectations, here's where what I say may be different, and I hope you'll sort of take this back with you. How you like to communicate may not be the best way to communicate for some of the people that you deal with. You might think it's my way, this is what I say, and if you don't like it, you don't have to work for me. And maybe you don't think it that aggressively, and maybe you don't think that all the time, but I'm sure, I know I've had a, it's my way or the highway, and if you don't like it, well then that's a different kind of conversation. I'm going to challenge you all to recognize that that is not going to be the best way to actually show respect and to be able to encourage and validate the differences that exist within your workforce. You might have to adjust the manner in which you speak. You might have to choose your words differently. You might have to have a different tone. You might have to not only verbally explain things, but also write things down. Learning differences, memory retention. Some people like to hear things in a group, some individually. And again, I am not trying to suggest to you that you have to have 15 different conversations because Randy said, well, this person likes to sit to the left and this person doesn't want to have any eye contact. No, no, no. I'm not trying to make you, take what already is a lot of supervisory responsibility and make it tenfold. I just want you to recognize that the way that you may choose to communicate may not always be the way that people want to receive information. So ask your people, hey, when I have that Tuesday meeting and I sit down and I give out the agenda and I go through things, does that work? They might say yes. They might also say, that works, but we'd also like if you did Y. Okay, then you evaluate. Do I have room to do Y? Do I have room to have one-off meetings with everybody once a week or bi-weekly or once a month? Or maybe people want me to email them the agenda ahead of time so they know what's coming. There's small differences, small things, or maybe everybody wants a chance once a week to be able to lead a conversation or to talk about something. I mean, again, we can come up with a bunch of different ideas, but recognize that you might be able to add to that culture of competency and respect and valuing differences by recognizing that other people may prefer to hear and be engaged in a way that differs from what you're used to doing. So challenge yourself too, right? To do it a bit differently and not just sort of keep going for if it's not broke, don't fix it. It may be broke and you just don't realize it. You do not want to manage in a vacuum, and I've already said this, it's not my way or the highway thinking. And when you are dealing with workplace disputes, whatever they may be, the critical kind, the less than critical kind, whether it's a boulder in the backpack or a pebble in the backpack, whether it's your backpack or somebody else's, you want to empathize, at least internally, with that person and what they're bringing to the table and what their concerns are. You want to show that you empathize so that the coworkers with whom you're dealing will also hopefully empathize. And this isn't something that happens overnight. None of what I am saying here can just instantly be turned on. But the more we do it and the more sustained we are, the more quickly it can happen and become entrenched. Inclusion and exclusion is absolutely something that we need to recognize when we're talking about respect and we're talking about cultural competency. And I don't suggest that this stuff happens in a mean-spirited level, but you have to recognize that there are times when there will be people who will feel excluded, even if that was not your intention. So you certainly do not want to have any kind of fundamental, no boys allowed at the table. This is a girls only lunch table, or women's only lunch table, or vice versa. There have obviously been many examples of isolation throughout history, segregation. Look, the employment statutes that I deal with on a daily basis have only been around for 50 years or less. So when you think about sort of where we are today in 2018, we have certainly made a lot of good progress, but oh my gosh, we have a lot more to make. And it's only in the last 50 years that things have gotten to the point where Congress said, okay, we're going to say it's unlawful to discriminate on the basis of race, religion, color, national origin, and then age and pregnancy and a variety of other characteristics. So it's not that long relative to the time that people have been working and interacting with others that the law tells us we can't exclude. People are still playing catch up. So we have to recognize that. When you are having quick informal meetings, are you including your go-to people, or are you making an effort to include everybody? Even the people that you just may not like, right? We all have people, well, it'd be fantastic if we didn't if we didn't have anybody that we disliked that we worked with. But I know that that's probably not the reality. We are going to like certain people better than others, and again, I am not going to stand up here and ever tell you that you can't do that. Like, that's just life, that's just being human. But as a supervisor, as a leader, in order to foster respect and have cultural competency as an organization, your personal like or dislike for any particular person or group of people needs to be set aside so that there is no suggestion that you are personally motivated by favoritism or the opposite. So when you are doing huddles, or you're having quick meetings, or you're just getting some informal guidance and feedback, consider who you go to, consider who else you can go to, and consider how you can make them feel that they're part of the conversation and discussion, even if you don't necessarily use their idea. But they're part of the process. They're part of the, yes, let's do this, no, let's not do that. Why would this work? Why might it not? Say to somebody, what do you think about this? What do you think, based on what you've been doing, how would this work? Do you have any ideas? They're not very challenging things to implement, and they will really go a long way, especially if consistently done and sincerely done. Obviously, the benefits of inclusion, just like the benefits of a respectful workplace, the benefits of embracing and valuing individuals, letting people speak their voice and utter their opinion reduces that risk of sort of that confirmation bias. So when the one person says that something's a good idea, then everybody else at the table says, oh yeah, that's a good idea. Does that ever happen to anybody, right? Because it's either just easier to say yes and move on to the next subject, or we want our supervisor or our leader to feel validated and heard, and you're the leader and you go, oh look, it's a great idea, everybody said yes. I'm doing a great job at this. No, that's confirmation bias perhaps. People just wanting to say what they think you want to hear. It happens. It absolutely happens. So challenge yourself to challenge those people to tell me, no, maybe you agree with me, but let's talk about a differing perspective. What might somebody else have to say? You want people to feel valued. It also makes people feel part of the team. So when a decision is made that everybody was a part of, or that people brought pieces of the puzzle to, they feel like they were contributing. They feel respected. They're coming to the table, even though they're not your normal go-to person. And then it also helps because we've probably done a better job of evaluating all the possibilities out there and making decisions that consider that and eliminating risk. People feel better, they're more productive. If you feel valued, you're going to work harder, right? And that's not just the number of zeros in your paycheck, although that certainly doesn't hurt. But if you feel like everybody values and your leader and your supervisors and your colleagues and your subordinates value you, you're probably going to work harder. It just happens. So let's make sure that that's something that we include as many people as we can without it getting counterproductive to actually getting work done. I certainly don't suggest that, but that we make it so that people can feel valued and respected. We've already talked about the fact that we are all a product of who we are, how we were raised, who raised us, what we saw, what we didn't see, what we experienced. It can become very easy to be set in our ways. So we want to make sure that we recognize that and that our sort of assumptions and generalizations that we all make all the time probably won't stop happening, but what can we do to counter it and not let it ultimately control what it is we do? So a stereotype. We haven't talked about this as a direct term. I've sort of danced around it, but now I'm going to put it out there. A stereotype is a widely held but fixed and oversimplified image, idea, or belief of a particular type of person or thing. It's a set idea that people have about what someone or something is like, especially one that is wrong. There can be positive stereotypes, but for the most part, when we're talking about stereotypes, especially in the workplace, it tends to be a negative, and we can all very easily label our fellow employees that way, especially when we don't know them well, especially when we make assumptions, or we make decisions based on what somebody else told us about their interactions, right? We decide and we get informed by other people. Oh, and then that's how I'm going to make my decision about so-and-so. That is not fair. That is not being fully informed, and that is not valuing that individual. And I'm going to tell you something that you all probably know, even if you haven't necessarily thought about it this way. It is much harder to actually dislike somebody once you better understand them and know them. So there are some negative stereotypes out there, and there are countless negative stereotypes. I threw a few up here. I don't mean to offend anybody with any of these. This is sort of the nature of the work I do. Sometimes I have to use examples. Very tall people probably played basketball or play basketball. And that's not a harmful stereotype. I don't know. Somebody who's tall may be offended by that, but it's a stereotype. People over a certain age are terrible drivers. Are you raising your hand? All right. I'm not the best driver, and you might not look at me and assume that. I mean, I'm a good driver. I just like to drive fast. People who grew up as only children are more selfish. That's a stereotype that some people may hold. A pregnant employee is not going to want to do her job when she gets closer to the end of her term, or she's likely going to ask for help and assistance. An employee who has children is probably going to end up taking a lot of sick leave. An employee who doesn't have children and isn't married is somebody who I can task with doing a lot of work because they've got nothing else going on in their lives. Think about it for a minute. When you were looking to ask somebody to stay late or do more, might you first consider the person that you know does not have familial obligations over the person that does? And you think you're being good, right? Well, I don't want to burden the person who's got, you know, the 27 kids and this and that and all the other stuff. I'm going to ask the person who has no life because they're always at PRMC. Because I'm always asking them to be at PRMC. But that person who doesn't have a family still may have things going on outside of the workplace that matter just as much to him or her and do not necessarily make them a prime candidate for your #1 overtime go-to. So those are just things to consider. There are very few absolutes in the world. What is it? Death and taxes, and I don't know if there's been a new one added. For example, 2 or more coworkers who are Jewish can observe certain holidays in very different ways or not observe them at all. Just because you're Jewish doesn't mean you do X or you don't do Y, and fill in the blank with any other kind of religion. Some Chinese Americans have siblings, others do not. People can be a veteran of military service and be emotionally sensitive. And again, I mean, I can go on and on. We all make assumptions, and yes, I say all because I'm sure somebody in here, bless you, has made an assumption at some point in his or her life about somebody. Okay, everybody close your eyes. I promise I'm not going to do anything weird. All right, just close your eyes. Put your phone down, close your eyes. Stop texting, stop saying, oh my gosh, what is she doing now? Imagine that every single person with whom you work is the same height, is the same weight, has the same hair color, the same eye color, and is wearing the exact same thing. Okay, you can open your eyes. So, I mean, I like Minions too, but you know. So, if we were all literal clones of each other in every physical way, in every internal way, in every experiential way, in every demographic way, and on, gosh, would we be boring and would it be horrible? I would not want to be a part of that society or that workplace or that organization. It's also, in addition to boring, we have had historical significant experience with how brutal and scary it can be when somebody has the belief taken to a horrible, catastrophic extreme that everybody should be the same. And I certainly don't mean to suggest that anybody in here adopts or thinks that way, but the idea that differences are bad or differences can be a barrier or differences are frustrating, I really hope, if nothing else today, you all think about and consider how valuable differences can be. Okay, look at the image on the slide. Real quick without thinking, how many of you see a candlestick or a vase? Raise your hand. How many of you see 2 faces in a silhouette? Okay. How you see something is not how your neighbor is necessarily going to see something. And you guys have seen, I'm sure, different variants on this, right? Perception, though, is reality. You see something, so you're going to assume other people are going to see it that way. And then when they tell you they don't see it that way, what do you mean? Remember when there was like the blue dress or the gold dress? And then there was something else that just happened where somebody was saying words and you couldn't tell what, I don't know. There's always something, right? But there's always 2 sides. Sometimes there's more than two sides to the story. This is an oversimplified way just to reinforce the point that what you see is not going to be what your neighbor, your colleague, your subordinate sees, even if you think it should be. All right. Any questions? Any comments? All right, thank you for sticking in. Okay. So when I started talking about a respectful workplace and a culture of respect and inclusion, a lot of you may have naturally gone to the concept of a workplace free of harassment and free of bullying, right? Because working in a workplace that tolerates, condones, permits harassment and bullying certainly is not respectful. But I wanted to first address, I think, the deeper, sort of less legalistic, but more meaningful ways that we as people, as humans that work together can become more respectful. But it is, I would be remiss if I didn't spend a few minutes talking about a toxic workplace, not made toxic by the chemicals with which we may deal, but the people with which we may deal, who may in fact not be that kind or that nice. So we're going to talk a little bit more specifically now about harassment and bullying, knowing that I only have about 10 minutes left. I promise you I'm not going to be diving super deeply, but I am hopefully going to reinforce some concepts that you've either previously heard or hopefully say them a slightly different way to make you think about them a little bit more as we go through with this. And then this is just a silly cartoon, but it always makes me giggle. For the last time, Wilson, you are not allowed to rub up against your coworkers. Wilson, of course, is a cat. But physical touch in the workplace happens, right? We see somebody. I've hugged hello to about 3 or 4 people this morning that I haven't seen in a while. I know people always say it's always great to see you, but I know it's bad news if I have to see you, so I'm glad I don't have to see you, and I don't take it personally. But physical touch happens in the workplace. We hug each other, we shake hands. Those innocuous touches are fine, and I never want people, especially when you're working alongside each other, long hours, long days, hospital, 24/7 operation. I recognize being a robot that's no way to be no matter where you work. But when you engage in physical touching that crosses the line, and your line may be different than somebody else's line. In fact, everybody's line is different. Not any person in this room has the exact same line upon which some kind of physical connection or physical touching is or isn't appropriate. We definitely, worry about what that does. So I'm going to spend some time talking about that. But let's just make sure real quickly that everybody in this room understands the concept of harassment. I'm sure it's a word you all have heard before. And if you haven't, well, harassment. As Katie Couric once said, I started in the journalism business when harass was 2 words instead of 1. Harass, okay. Sorry, it wasn't my joke, it was Katie's. Legally, let me talk to you about the legal definition, and then we're going to really talk about practical, because my job is to do the legal stuff. You guys are not lawyers, nor do I want you to be. I want you to be good leaders and good supervisors and think about harassment in that context. But harassment, just so you all understand where I'm coming from, are words or conduct, or a combination of the two, that is severe or pervasive, that could be abusive and hostile, that is unwelcome, and is done because of somebody's sex or race or any other protected characteristic, religion, disability, age, etc. Usually we're dealing with a hostile work environment. How many of you have heard of that term before? Hostile work environment. Okay, a hostile work environment where somebody is making comments, saying things and doing things that targets a person because of their race, because of their sex. A very common, well-known, obvious example is sexual harassment, hostile work environment based on sex, where comments are made. Hey, baby, a squeeze of the buttocks, a wink of the eye, inappropriate groping, sending messages by text or email, posting things on social media. We all obviously know, given the Me Too movement and Roger Ailes and all that has happened, and has been going on out there, that sexual harassment in the workplace is still very much alive and well. But please understand that hostile work environment harassment can also be based on other categories. Understand that even a single comment or incident, if offensive enough, can result in discipline and liability for both the hospital and the individual or individuals involved in the harassment. So oftentimes it is a series of events and comments that will usually lead to the conclusion that there's been hostile work environment, or that there might have been a hostile work environment. Sometimes there can be such an egregious act that happens, and it almost always involves physical touching or the use of a horrible, racially inappropriate word or some other significant examples, that it's one and done, and there's already potential concern and exposure. So you need to just keep that in mind, that as an institution, as an organization, we do not tolerate harassment of any kind. We do not want to be ignoring it if we see it. We absolutely do not want to be engaging in it. And as leaders, we have an affirmative obligation to stop it, to report it to the people department, and to ensure that we ourselves are not doing anything that sends the message that we are okay with inappropriate behavior. Because of time constraints, I don't have the time today to go into a full what is harassment, but I want you all just to keep that in mind, and you do have a fantastic people department that would much rather hear from you that you saw something that you're not quite sure if it's a problem, but let them do their job and help you figure out if it is and what might need to be done. Now, bullying has become a little bit more of a common theme in the workplace, and it's something that very often gets blurred with harassment because bullying behavior is often very similar to harassing behavior. But let me just give you sort of the technical legal definition of bullying. It is unwanted, again, just like harassment's unwelcome, aggressive behavior that involves a power balance, whether real or just perceived. It's repeated or can be repeated, and it causes lasting trauma for the victim and, in fact, the bully. And usually, bullying can break down into three categories: verbal, the words, the vicious talking directed at the victim that isn't necessarily racially hostile or sexually hostile, but is just mean, nasty conversation, name-calling that is unacceptable and disrespectful. Physical behavior can also be bullying. When somebody gets bumped into walking down the hall, you may not hit them hard, they may not get hit hard, but there's definitely something going on there that suggests that there's some territorial approach, some bullying happening. And then, of course, there's the social piece where the verbal comments are not being directed just at the victim, but being told to others about the victim. Harassment and bullying have no place in the workplace, no place in a respectful workplace. Tolerance of either is a discredit to the workplace. And obviously there are costs. And some of these may seem obvious, but I'm going to go ahead and say them anyway. Employees do not feel valued. When they see or feel harassment or bullying going on, they feel silenced, they don't feel heard, they get scared, they don't want to come to work, they start missing work, they're not as productive, people leave. You all maybe have had experiences where there's been some toxicity in your department. Maybe it doesn't rise to the level of bullying, maybe it doesn't rise to the level of harassment, but it doesn't feel good. These are things you all definitely need to keep in mind. And of course, there can certainly be litigation and settlement and damage awards. Bullying and harassment is unprofessional, has nothing to do with work performance. And here's the question that I always pose when I'm doing a more developed presentation on harassment or bullying in the workplace. Would you want your child or spouse subjected to it? Would you want your child or spouse subjected to it? Or somebody in your life, if you don't have a child or spouse, that you care for very deeply. Because sometimes we'll put up with something ourselves that we wouldn't want somebody else putting up with. So let that be your standard and your guidance. Here are some examples of bullying and harassment, so again, because sometimes the behaviors cross over, that happen in the workplace that I want you all to be cognizant of, because this goes to discrediting that respectful workplace and that value that you all as leaders are working so hard to establish. Excluding someone socially, always going to lunch or going out or doing certain things as a department, but not including a certain person or two because they're so difficult, they're not friendly, they're nasty, whatever those words are. They're a snob. Maybe they're just shy and uncomfortable. Establishing impossible deadlines. All right, I'm going to show this person what it's like to work for me when I don't like you. You've got to do X, Y, and Z in 30 minutes ago. Going out of your way to criticize somebody in a way that actually may be a valid criticism, but you're doing it in front of others, you're doing it with a loud voice, you're doing it with an aggressive tone, etc. Underworking could be another thing. Making somebody feel so useless and undervalued that you actually think so little of them that you don't give them work. So these are things you all need to be thinking about. And again, I am not suggesting that anybody in this room is engaging in this behavior. But think about it. Are there others who are? Are there ways that you are unintentionally perhaps sending a message that you don't mean to? Here are things that are not bullying or harassment, because usually you hear so much that is. I do want to remind you that not everything is. Differences of opinion. It's okay to have a difference of opinion. In fact, I've spent a good part of this morning talking about valuing that difference of opinion. We like that we have differences of opinion. Normal disagreements between coworkers. Constructive criticism in a performance review, which will become more of a theme during this afternoon's presentation. Disciplining an employee for violating a legitimate policy, whether it's time and attendance or something else. Considering somebody's idea but rejecting it. And then my last one, a socially appropriate hug between friends. There's the socially appropriate hug, which does not involve squeezing somebody extra tight, rubbing your hands all over them, and doing some kind of funky twerking dance, right? And I say that because people will say to me, especially after I do my full presentation on harassment, I feel like I can't hug my coworkers anymore, or that if I accidentally tap them on the shoulder or bump them as I'm walking by them, that something bad's going to happen. No, that is not the case. But kind of like the Supreme Court opinion that once spoke about pornography, you know it when you see it. I mean, use your radar, but remember, what you think is okay may not be okay for the person on the receiving end. So that golden rule of treat others the way you want to be treated, I think it needs to be rewritten. Treat others the way they want to be treated. Because your standards for you are your standards, but that person that is on the receiving end of the conversation, the hug, etc., that is for them. All right, so I am almost finished, promise. Good rules of thumb. Do not test the line of what harassment is or is not. As supervisors especially, you all are held to a higher standard. Do not test the line of what is bullying and what is not. If you see something, say something, just like the TSA says. Stop, intervene, use the people department. They're a fantastic resource. They understand this stuff because that is their job too. And you all are also employees. If you believe you've been harassed, if you believe you've been bullied, you have the exact same right to work in a place that doesn't have that going on, and you have the same right to get it stopped. All right. I'm going to just take a second to talk about communication approach and style because I've already talked about it throughout the morning, and just reinforce some concepts. The way that you speak may not work for everybody that you speak to. So keep that in mind as you communicate with those with whom you work. Being respectful means considering the way your audience is going to receive, your coworkers, your colleagues, your subordinates, your superiors are going to receive the information that you deliver. Consider what the person who is listening, how they receive information. Some people like direct and blunt. Some people like it softer. Some people are emotional people by their very nature. Keep that in mind when you engage them. Know your audience and tailor your message accordingly. Are you with a group of people? Are you on a one-on-one? Are you communicating electronically? Emails and texts never go away, my friends. They never go away. So keep that in mind when you are communicating that way. All right, because of our time and where we are, I had a couple of quiz questions at the end. I think they're pretty easy. I don't think anything is too difficult. But I'm going to go ahead at this point just so we can stay a little bit closer to the schedule and get to that slide, which should hopefully make everybody happy, and ask, are there any questions from anybody that I can answer, whether up here or during the break? Wow, I was that good and effective. Thank you all so much. I very much appreciate your time and attention. Thank you.